I used to believe that love, real love, was unbreakable. That when two people found each other, they'd hold on no matter what storms came. I believed that when I met Emily, she was everything I thought I'd been missing. Laughter in the quiet, warmth in the cold, a hand that felt like home. We met at a small art gallery downtown. I wasn't even supposed to be there. My business partner had dragged me along, insisting I needed to live a little. I remember standing there, holding a glass of cheap wine, pretending to care about the abstract pieces on the wall, when she appeared beside me. Her eyes caught mine, deep hazel, curious, almost shy. She asked what I thought about the painting. I said it looked like chaos. She smiled and said, "Maybe chaos is beautiful." That line stuck with me. Still does. Fast forward 8 years, and chaos was all that remained. Emily and I built a life that looked perfect from the outside. A nice suburban home, two cars, steady careers, and dinners with friends who thought we had it all figured out. But somewhere between her late nights at work and my endless meetings, something shifted. It was subtle at first, just the way her phone always seemed to face down, or how she'd step into another room to take a call. I told myself it was nothing. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband who couldn't trust his wife. But I was wrong. The first crack came one rainy Thursday night. She said she had to stay late at the office, a client deadline. I believed her. But at 10:43 p.m., when I couldn't sleep and reached for my phone, I saw a text I wasn't meant to see. She'd left her tablet connected to our shared account. A message popped up. "I miss you already. Can't wait to see you again." I remember the way my stomach dropped, like gravity itself had turned against me. I stared at those words for what felt like forever, trying to convince myself it was some misunderstanding, a friend, a coworker, a joke, anything but what it really was. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she kissed me on the cheek, said she loved me, and walked out the door. I watched her drive away, and for the first time, I didn't say I love you back. That day, something inside me cracked, quietly, almost gently. But I knew it was the start of something I couldn't stop. That night, I opened her laptop. I knew her password, the same one she'd used for years. My hands trembled as I typed it in. What I found changed everything. There were messages, hundreds of them, a thread of digital intimacy stretching back months, photos, plans, a hotel receipt under his name. I read every word, each one cutting deeper than the last. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there staring at the screen until the words started to blur. At 2 a.m., I closed the laptop and looked at my reflection in the dark window. That man staring back at me wasn't me anymore. He was colder, sharper. And for the first time in my life, I understood why people say revenge is addictive. Because in that moment, the idea of justice was the only thing that kept me breathing. The morning after discovering the truth, everything looked the same. The same kitchen counter, the same half-empty coffee mug she'd left beside the sink, the same faint trace of her perfume lingering in the air. But I wasn't the same. I had a secret now, a dark, burning truth that lived behind my eyes, one she had no idea I knew. Emily came home that evening, smiling like nothing had changed. She told me about her day, about some coworker who'd messed up a client report, about how exhausted she was. I nodded, listened, played my role. Every movement, every word, was calculated. I was the husband she thought she still controlled. When she leaned over to kiss me, I forced myself not to flinch. Her lips, the same lips that whispered to him, brushed against mine. And I smiled. I smiled because I knew. In those next few weeks, I became an actor in my own life. I kept the routine, morning coffee together, I love you texts, movie nights. All the while, I watched her. I studied her movements, her words, her lies. She had a pattern. Tuesdays and Thursdays she worked late. Friday lunches she met clients. The same excuses, the same tone. She'd become lazy in her deceit. So I played the long game. One Thursday night, after she left for a project review, I followed her. She didn't see me. She never imagined I'd question her. I parked 2 blocks away and watched as she walked into a boutique hotel downtown, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. 15 minutes later, a man walked in after her. Mid-30s, expensive suit. That smug confidence of someone who's never been caught doing anything wrong. I didn't need a name. I already hated him enough to know everything I needed to. I stayed there for hours, staring at that hotel door, my heartbeat echoing like gunfire in my chest. I wanted to storm in, to scream, to tear the lie apart right there in the lobby. But I didn't, because that would have been mercy. And mercy wasn't what I had in mind. When she came home that night, her hair slightly out of place, her eyes tired but glowing, I asked her how her meeting went. She said productive. I smiled, said I was proud of her. Then I poured us both a drink, whiskey for me, wine for her. She talked. I listened. Every word she spoke became another stone in the foundation of what I was building. I spent the next few weeks preparing. Not a confrontation. Not violence. No, my revenge would be quieter, slower. I wanted her to feel what I had felt. Confusion, fear, doubt. I wanted to take everything she'd built, our trust, our security, our peace, and turn it into glass beneath her feet. I started small. I changed passwords, shifted money between accounts, moved files from her work laptop, just enough to make her question herself. Then I began planting seeds, little lies that would grow into chaos. An anonymous text, a wrong number, a familiar perfume left on her car seat. She started to unravel. I saw it in her eyes, the way she glanced at her phone, hesitated before speaking, woke up in the middle of the night. She'd look at me searching for reassurance, and I'd give it to her with a smile so calm it made her doubt her own sanity. But here's the truth. Revenge doesn't come clean. It stains everything it touches. Even me, some nights. I'd wake up, look at her sleeping beside me, and wonder, was I becoming worse than her? Or was I simply returning the pain she'd earned? The answer never came, because one night, as I stood in the dark hallway watching her sleep, I realized something terrifying. I didn't want her forgiveness. I wanted her to break. And the plan I had for that was almost ready. There's an engineering mind in me that never truly leaves the job site. I can look at a failing wall and tell you which brick shifted first, which bolt corroded, which design choice allowed the rot to creep in. That same habit became a kind of salvation and a weapon. After I found out, I stopped thinking about revenge as a burst of righteous fury. I thought about it as construction work in reverse. If they had built their infidelity out of small bricks, stolen minutes, secret text strings, taxis at odd hours, then I would remove those bricks one by one until the whole structure had no choice but to fall. First, I secured my perimeter. Privacy is a paradox. Once you breach it, you can't go back. I told myself that watching then was not voyeurism but a necessary excavation. I backed up everything. Screenshots, photos, timestamps, locations. I duplicated receipts, logged hotel check-ins, archived chat logs. I labeled folders with gates like I used to label blueprints. Clean, clinical, immutable. Files are democracy for the betrayed. They don't care about your tears, only about proof. Next came the small sabotage that felt like fate. I began to move objects, subtly. A charger placed in a different socket. Her calendar invite shifted by an hour. A forwarded email sent to the wrong thread. None were catastrophic on their own, but they rattled the cadence of someone who relied on predictability. People who deceive live by patterns. Interrupt the rhythm, and you create space for doubt. Then I turned to the professional sphere where reputation is scaffolded like scaffolding around a building. Emily's work was public-facing, steeped in endorsements and handshakes. She curated an image of effortless competence. I wanted that image to crack, so I introduced friction where there had been grease. A vendor that had always been paid on time received a polite, paper-based inquiry about authorization. A donor who'd always shown up to events got a carefully worded invitation to reassess partnership. I did not lie. I framed existing facts under new lights. It was legal, it was clean, and it was devastating because it made her world ask questions she couldn't answer without exposing herself. Ethan, the man I came to hate with the calmness of a winter wind, was the easier architecture to undermine. He lived by bravado, by charm, by convincing people that smiling absolves errors. I started tracing who he'd borrowed favors from, who he'd promised quick returns to, whose signatures he'd slid under the table. I called quietly, using phrases like "just double-checking" or "for compliance," and let their own bureaucracies do the work of suspicion. Bureaucracy is patient and fatal. It chews reputations into filings. But the coldest move, the one that felt almost surgical in its cruelty, was psychological. Human beings tell themselves stories about who they are. Unravel those stories, and you make them naked. So, I began to return to Emily what she had given me, and certainty. I answered her questions with calm, practiced nonchalance. When she asked why I'd changed a password or why a client had emailed differently, I said it was routine security, or an auditing quirk. I let her think her guilt was paranoia. That slow erosion of certainty is worse than any public shaming because it poisons the private mind. The mind that once slept becomes a house with too many lights on at night. One evening, as they sat in a restaurant midweek and laughed in a way that used to hurt me like a flensing knife, I sent Ethan a simple message from an anonymous number. "You're being sloppy." He responded with bravado and then, foolishly, with worry. Sloppy men make sloppy choices. Sloppy choices leave trails. I sat in my truck across the street, hands steady on the steering wheel, thinking of all the times I'd told myself I'd be gentler. Those promises had been brittle under this new weather. There were moments of a different kind of pain. My children remained my anchor and my torment. I would put them to bed, kiss them, and hear them ask an innocently pointed question, "Dad, why is Mommy sad?" and feel the guilt of the world press against my ribs. I told them what a tired parent tells their children, that grown-ups have problems to solve, that sometimes people need space, that the adults are working on things. Those answers were small lies meant to protect them from the sharpness I had freed. I watched Emily at her mirror one morning as she practiced a smile. She mouthed words at herself like a woman practicing a role she'd been cast into without consent. It was one of the few times I felt a pulse of something that wasn't hatred, a slow, tender shred of grief for what we'd once been. But grief is a dangerous companion to this kind of work. It makes you hesitate. Hesitation breaks plans. So I self-grieved in private and kept my hands steady. As more pieces slid into place, an invoice that didn't reconcile, an email forwarded to a compliance officer who asked questions instead of calming things, a whispered rumor landing where it would be most painful. Both their facades began to show hairline fractures. People who had depended on Emily's competence began to ask for verification. Colleagues who once deferred to Ethan's charm now double-checked details. I watched the world closer on them like a bell jar. Their confidence, once so blithe and self-assured, curdled into a constant small panic. The strategy demanded restraint. Never confront in a way that could be twisted as violence. Never slip a direct threat that would be turned back on me. Keep the moral high ground even as you sharpen it into a scalpel. That paradox is what drives the slowly righteous to the edge. We claim justice while practicing deception. It's a moral loop that loops back on itself until you're dizzy. On the 7th week, I set the final little domino. A printed set of documents, clean bank transfers, hotel receipts with matching timestamps, and annotated emails slipped into the office inbox of someone Emily respected. The papers were neutral, almost bureaucratic. Their authority lay not in emotion but in the undeniable arithmetic of dates and dollars. A week later, a quiet conversation in a boardroom changed her role. A donor withdrew a pledge. A regular client asked for clarity. The small avalanches of consequence multiplied when the first real question came from her office manager. Did you authorize this? I sat at the kitchen table and did something I hadn't expected to be able to do without breaking. I breathed. Not relief, not victory, but an odd, cold certainty. The plan was working in the way I had designed it, methodical, unavoidable, bureaucratic. The truth had teeth, yet as the dominoes toppled, there came a new awareness that seized me in the chest. Every influence I'd called, every rumor I'd nudged, every vendor I'd prodded, there were human lives tangled in those actions. A supplier who lost a contract had a son who'd missed out on a college scholarship. A colleague who got reassigned had a mortgage payment due next week. Revenge, I had learned, was not a clean instrument. It was a tidal machine, and tides wash over 1,000 small things. That knowledge sat like an extra weight on my shoulders. Sometimes at night I'd wake and imagine all the faces of those collateral people, and the image would be a chorus that rendered my hard work ambiguous. Had I been right? Had I been merciful? Had I been monstrous? The questions were endless, and often they had no satisfying answer. Still, I refused to stop, not because I enjoyed the hurt. I didn't, but because the world had given me a choice between passive suffering and agency. I took agency like a man who's learned the architecture of falling things, precisely, stubbornly, and with a professional eye toward structure. If they wanted to build their life on the backs of someone else's trust, then they had to be prepared to see that structure fall when its foundations were removed. The last nights before the formal investigation started felt like waiting for a thunderclap you could no launch. Are here. The air was heavy. The evidence was set. The people around them, those who had once handed out smiles and drinks, now looked sideways. The work had become more than revenge. It had become a test. If truth could be marshaled like a document and delivered into the right hands, could it change what happens next? Would a public ledger be enough to force honesty where private lies had once reigned? In the quiet before the storm, I watched them both in the house I still shared with them. Emily reading a magazine in the living room, Ethan's number still appearing on her screen like a ghost. The children's toys scattered innocently across the floor. The ordinary warmth of the coffee mug steaming on the counter. It looked like a normal life. It felt like an apparatus built on betrayal. And I pressed on, because there is a gravity to action. You move, you push, you pull, and sooner or later the balance changes. The only question left was whether, standing in the new landscape, after the dust settled, I'd recognize the world I'd helped shape, or the man I'd become in the process. There's a moment, just before a structure collapses, when everything goes eerily still. Engineers call it the silent second, the space between tension and failure, when the load can no longer be sustained, but the fall hasn't yet begun. That's where I was living. In that quiet before the inevitable sound of impact, Emily's perfect world was cracking. Subtly at first, unanswered emails, colleagues who suddenly stopped meeting her eyes, whispers that followed her down hallways. Then, faster, the board temporarily suspended her pending review. Ethan's firm began its own internal audit. Prompted by anonymous compliance concerns, the dominoes I'd set had started their descent. She came home early one evening, pale and trembling, clutching her phone like a confession. I was in the kitchen, pretending to scroll through the news. They're saying someone's been spreading lies about me, she said, voice shaking. Someone hacked my email. They found things, old messages, private things. I looked up, calm. Private things. She froze. The silence stretched like an open wound between us. Tears gathered in her eyes, not from guilt, but from fear. The fear of losing control. The fear of being seen for what she'd done. I don't understand what's happening, she whispered. That was the first honest thing she'd said in months. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her how she could stand there, feigning confusion, when I had the proof burned into my memory like a scar. But I didn't. Instead, I simply nodded and said, Maybe it's time we both start telling the truth. Her shoulders sagged. The fight drained out of her, replaced by something quieter. You know, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. How long? Long enough. She sank into the nearest chair and covered her face. For a long moment, the only sound was her breathing, broken, uneven, human. I should have felt triumph. This was the moment I had built toward with patience and precision. But what I felt was something colder, heavier. Not victory, not peace, just emptiness. Because the truth is, revenge doesn't end when you deliver it. It lingers. It reshapes you in its image. She started talking fast, desperate, like words could somehow rewind time. She said she'd been lonely, that Ethan had been a mistake, that it hadn't meant anything. Every syllable was a nail in the coffin of the man I used to be, the one who might have believed her. When she reached for my hand, I didn't pull away. I let her fingers rest there, trembling, fragile. Then softly, I said, "You didn't just cheat on me. You cheated the life we built. You burned a future I gave everything for." Her eyes searched mine, but I'd already gone somewhere she couldn't reach. I stood, picked up my coat, and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Home," I said. "Wherever that is now." The next morning, I delivered the final blow. A small envelope, hand-delivered to her company's HR office, everything they needed to close their investigation. Proof beyond argument. I didn't need to see her reaction. I'd already lived through enough of them. Ethan's name disappeared from the firm's website 2 weeks later. A quiet resignation. Emily moved out shortly after. I let her take whatever she wanted. The house was just walls now. For a while, I told myself I'd won, that justice had been served. But late at night, when the house fell still and the ghosts of our laughter whispered in the dark, I realized something brutal. I hadn't freed myself. I'd only caged her and locked myself inside the same prison. Revenge, I learned, is never about the other person. It's about the part of yourself that can't let go of the wound. Months passed. I stopped checking her social media, stopped watching the news for hints of her name. I rebuilt slowly, clumsily, piece by piece. I spent more time outside, long walks, long silences. The anger faded, but the scar remained. Sometimes I wonder what she tells people now. Maybe she calls it a misunderstanding. Maybe she paints herself as the victim. It doesn't matter anymore. The truth isn't for her, it's for me. And my truth is this: you can destroy someone and still lose everything. You can burn the liar and still smell like smoke. Revenge doesn't cleanse. It consumes. But still, in the quiet after the storm, when I stand in the cold dawn and feel the world turn without her, I know one thing for certain: I may never be whole again. But I am free.